most of the folks, most of the CAG members, and I think we're about ready. Ready to go?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the March CAG meeting, Lowry Landfill CAG meeting. Um, Again, we're all old hands now at the Zoom operations, so I don't think I need to remind you to mute your uh, computers and or phones if you are not speaking. If you want to interject or say something, you can put a comment in the chat box and Janine will be sure and call you. You can also, if you find a lull, you can jump in, but sometimes it's best just to notify Janine. And if anybody's having technical difficulties, they can call or text Janine. You want to put your number in the chat again? That seems like a handy way to do it. And Janine, did you have anything else for tonight?
No, there's one more thing. I will be monitoring chat too. So, and I think Mike does a little bit of that as well. So we'll be pitching back and forth to make sure things work well and fluidly. And
Right.
there is my phone number.
Okay, thank you. Um, so I'll hand it to Mike if
Good. I have done a little screen share just so we can quickly review tonight's agenda. Also, on the Zoom process, there's the opportunity to raise your hand using reactions. So look for that at the bottom and throw your hand in the air if you need. Just remember to lower it when you're done. That'll help. So tonight, we start with a standard agenda item. Updates, EPA, CDPHE, the CAG board, others if there is just some quick announcement. I've added this note so that I will remind myself and you as well that these updates are not intended to generate discussion. And if they do, we need to set them aside and make them an agenda item at some point so that a discussion can be planned. So these are intended to not create reaction or discussion. But if they do, we know what to do with them. We can move them elsewhere. But these are just updates and announcements. Then I've actually grabbed a piece of the agenda for myself. So I hope that's okay. Just to do a little process check. I've been in a couple meetings. The idea is to just say sort of where are we? I've thrown a couple of procedural things in here. Mostly I want to spend some time on the ground rules, which were distributed along with the documents for the two substantive items, which you see at 510 and 605. 5-year review addendum went out very closely after your last meeting. And so we're going to give EPA a chance to, and I think it's Linda in this case, a chance to just recap the document. I got some questions, or there were some questions in the agenda building about the fact sheet and whether it was an EPA document or an EPA and CDPHE document. So we'll touch on that, or perhaps it will in the presentation. And then discussion. And I want to ask that we discuss the two documents separately. If there needs to be discussion of the fact sheet, we do that separately from the addendum. And that as we go through that document, if you would just identify where you are in the document, which part of the addendum you're in and discussing, et cetera. And then it is, at some point soon, you will see a conceptual site model. And when it is on the agenda for a real substantive discussion will depend on making sure that the CAG has time with it once it is out for public review. And so not clear that it will be on your next meeting, though it could. But the idea is to just do an overview, answer some big picture kinds of questions, have a little very short discussion in anticipation that you will see it before long, maybe April, maybe not. And then we adjourn at 6:30. So let me stop there and see if there are amendments to or questions about the agenda. Okay, so then let's move to updates and EPA. we'll let you jump in first if there's some, again, non-discussion item that you just want to make sure people are aware of.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to start out by introducing two EPA staff members who sometimes, well, one has attended our meetings in the past and the other is a new addition. So Andrew Mutter, our Director of Public Affairs, is on the call today. And Fran Costanzi, who is our 5-year review coordinator. I asked her to join us so she can answer any questions you have about 5-year reviews. She's a professional engineer, and she teaches our Superfund 101 course for all of our new project managers nationally. So she's a wealth of information, so I thought she'd be a good addition for this meeting since we're talking about 5-year reviews. As far as documents that are being worked on, EPA is developing the North Boundary Barrier Wall Containment System Evaluation, the conceptual site model. So that's still under development, and they're currently not ready, but as soon as they are, we'll let you know. And I know that the CAG is really interested in finding out where the TAG grant is in its process. So it has made it to its final steps, and Cease, who is the project officer for the TAG grant, should be contacting Bonnie next week about it. So that's great news. Pretty happy about that. That's all I had.
Linda, could I ask you, please? I'm having trouble hearing people. Who did you say would be contacting me?
To say the project officer that you've been working with.
Uh-huh. Oh, you want to say? Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Colleen, anything from CDPHE?
Yeah, the update we have is that we're hoping to begin sampling the Gun Club Estates domestic wells sometime in the late summer or early fall. And that would be pending continued vaccination rollout and lifting of COVID restrictions. But that's what the time frame we're shooting for.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, Bonnie, let me turn it to you and any updates from the CAG. We've got you on mute. There you go.
Okay. We do have some updates. The CAG has been contacted by the Buckley CAG group, and Buckley Air Force Base has been giving us their documents. And we did attend the last CAG meeting. Very impressed with it. At the last CAG meeting, it was clear that Buckley is trying to find solutions so that liability is reduced by them addressing the issues in a manner that keeps the contaminants from going off site and impacting water. In spite of the COVID, they have already done their water testing. And so we're kind of disappointed in that because we understand that COVID has been an issue, but Buckley was able to contact the private well owners and they have already conducted tests on the private wells. So we're anxious for CDPHE to move forward with the Gun Club Estates tests. And we would like to be kept in touch on that issue because we're very curious what's going to be tested for and whether or not something will be set up to where we're hoping that these wells haven't been impacted yet, but we are hopeful that a system can be set up where the wells will be tested on a regular basis, and so that we can keep up with it, because even though maybe we haven't been impacted in our private water wells yet, we want to make sure that we aren't. And so very good news, Colleen, that you're going to be moving forward soon. We also have been given the Buckley work sessions on what they're going to do for 1,4-dioxane and how they're going to address it. Buckley is going to address it on the 0.35 level for 1,4-dioxane. And we were very impressed with the way that the regulators and Buckley work together on these issues. And so we would like to see more effective cooperation from here on with Lowry as well. Also, another update is that we did attend the public meeting that was put on by the state in cooperation with EPA RCRA corrective action on the Aquapuff site. Again, we were very impressed with the personnel who were doing the testing. And we do believe that the Aquapuff site, if the wells have not been properly placed for 30 years, we just want to be sure that whatever might be leaching out of that site is not adding to the offsite plume from Lowry landfill. But again, the cooperation, the regulators, the work that they're doing was very impressive. And so even though the Lowry landfill Superfund site CAG group and regulators felt that it was not the proper place for a meeting to brief the CAG on this site and what work was proposed. We did have the public meeting and we were very impressed with the State Health Department and their work. And so again, we're trying to look towards a more cooperative manner of working on Lowry landfill. The last thing I would like to say is that we have put together a list of items. We think it's moving very quickly towards EPA making a final decision on Lowry landfill Superfund site, which indicates that the EPA believes that the site is protected. We understand that there have been a couple of statements released that a couple of the operable units may not be. And so they're going to study that a little further. But I have the documents that were studied and put together by the CAG, and we would like to submit them. I didn't submit them now because you like to see things before the meetings. I will be sending out our comments on what we think needs to be addressed and corrected at the site. And so I will be sending that out this next week to you all so that you can review it and give us your response. But these are the items that we think, for instance, tonight, I'm not sure why the Lowry landfill CAG operating procedures were sent out, but these are the operating procedures that we see EPA needs to be using to determine the protectiveness of the Lowry landfill Superfund site according to the best practices that EPA has recommended. And so I will be sending these out this next week for your review. Lastly, I asked a question by email today about why the public needs to present a FOIA request. And I did receive an email from Mike Hughes saying that he's not trying to be rude or anything, but why don't we just send him the documents ourselves? We did send them the documents, Michael, the minute we were asked. And that is not our responsibility. When somebody goes to EPA and asks for specific documents, they're not supposed to have to go through a FOIA to accomplish that end. We did send the documents they were requesting, but they were requesting research on more than one Superfund site. So I have sent them out, but there is a procedure that EPA has set up for public involvement, and we would like to see that procedure used from now on when the public asks for documents. So my questions were based upon that issue. And so I think that's all I have to add tonight. If Tom Kraus has more that he would like to add, Tom, you can go ahead. Otherwise, I guess our updates are done.
Tom, all done? Okay. For some reason, I don't see him. Oh, there's two screens. Tom, we all good? Okay. Okay, so let me just start where Bonnie left off. I'm moving to the next agenda item after updates, which is some process check. So that's why the operating protocols were sent out, because I think this is an opportunity to just check in and do exactly what Bonnie suggested, which is if this is going to become a more cooperative venue, then one of the places to look for ways to do that is the operating protocol. So I just wanted to stop and do a quick process check, and the protocols were sent out as a result of that. And this was on the agenda when we all worked on the agenda. But I got a couple of other things that may be dispensed with pretty quickly on the process side. I got a suggestion to move the April meeting by a week, so a week later, because there are 5 Thursdays in April. And you can do that with and kind of spread the April meeting more evenly between the March and the May meeting. And so just wanted to check and see if there are any difficulties with that, any problems with moving a week later in April, given that there are 5 Thursdays. Any objection? Good. Okay. Second, in a CAG board meeting that I was asked to attend by the CAG board, there was some conversation about communication from EPA about what is appropriate or inappropriate to say about the remedy, and specifically using TAG grants appropriately. And so I just wanted to bring this to the group's attention in this public setting, because I think sometimes these communications result in kind of things getting expanded or these items taking on a life of their own. And so the way I heard it was really that this feels like a constraint on speech, on being able to raise the concern, or and so I just want to make sure that that is not happening, and just wanted to bring that to EPA's attention while we're all together. Because I think even if there has been communication about the appropriate uses of TAG funds, I think it would be useful, just given the concerns that I heard in that meeting, to just do another round of, these are the obligations that you take on when you take on TAG funds, and what is not appropriate in the use of those funds. Because again, I heard it really expanded to this: we're not free to speak about certain things because we take CAG funds. So if I've mischaracterized that for any of the CAG board members, feel free to amplify what I just said. But it gave me enough pause that I just wanted to make sure it was on the agenda as something to really pay attention to, so this doesn't, again, expand or take on a life of its own. That all okay? Okay, so let me offer what is my answer, or partial answer, it will be only partial, to Bonnie's question about how to increase cooperation. And so I'm going to go back to just a quick screen share. This is page 4 of the operating protocol that you have. And I do think that increased cooperation is going to depend on these things that are in section 5 on communication. And so I just wanted to ask all of the participants in this meeting to be as mindful as you can be of your own protocols for communication, treating one another with respect. I just want to say that that gets defined by the recipient of speech that is deemed disrespectful. So if someone believes that I have spoken disrespectfully to them, it is their definition of respect that should be honored. And so they are free, should be free. You all should be free to say, I don't think that was respectful. And so it's the receiver of that communication who ought to say, hey, look, I'm not okay with that. I don't think that was a respectful way to go after that topic. And so I think that will help. I think that will improve cooperation. Speaking one at a time, expressing your own views. So less we, more I think, not speaking for other people. Focusing on the issues and refraining from personal attacks. So I don't think it should be much of a secret that I have had communication with participants in this process who believe that they have been attacked. That's a fairly strong word, but that this has gotten personal toward them. And so just something to be mindful of, to be careful about, and again, to call out if you're the receiver of that. Avoid grandstanding, stay on track. I love number 7. Clearly communicate concerns and interests and ideas and the reason behind them. And really the reason to focus on these ground rules is so that sorry about making you dizzy, that this purpose can be achieved. That the whole point of this is to have the CAG provide input and have that input taken seriously. To have questions answered clearly. To discuss needs and concerns and priorities related to the site on the substantive level. So that's the reason for these ground rules and for paying some greater attention to them. Number 8, you've gotten rid of because of COVID. So this says you're not going to record these meetings, but of course you're doing that, or we are all doing that and participating in it's being recorded. So I think 8 we can dispense with for the moment of necessity. And then the last one is how you speak outside the meeting, but I really want to focus on the ones that are inside the meeting, so 1 through 7. And with that, I just want to stop and see if others, let me just say one more thing. At the end of that section, there's no, and therefore, the consequences of violating these are such and so. So I don't have any authority to stop someone, to dispense with someone's presence, to mute people, to excuse you from the room, those kinds of things. But I do think that there should be consequences for violating these. And so I don't expect you to know what those might be, but I do think you ought to start thinking about them. That if the spirit of this is not what Bonnie said in her opening, which is more cooperation, and if violating these ground rules is what's doing that, then I think you all have to figure out what you're going to do about that as a whole group. So I wanted to call attention to it, put it on your radar screen, get you to be thinking and more mindful about what is creating cooperation or interfering with it. And we have a couple more minutes, so I don't have to do all the talking. If there are things that others would like to say, just to try to make the process more able to accomplish those goals at the top, which is that input is taken seriously, that questions are answered thoroughly.
I have a comment, Michael. It's John Barber.
Sure.
Bonnie mentioned a couple of meetings that we went to that everything was laid out and there was good Q&A, good question and answer follow-up. Those meetings were dynamically different than anything we have experienced with this group. Now, why is that? Because we as a CAG didn't act any different there than we did here. It was the respondents that were giving the information to an understandable level, accurately, and specifically answering our questions. I feel like here, I can go outside and say, gosh, it's raining hard. Why is it raining? And the answer is, it's not raining. That's just your perception. And that's the challenge that we have as a CAG group. We don't know how to respond to that. So sometimes I think we do become aggressive because we're frustrated that we can't get a direct answer. And I don't know how else to put it other than to say, go listen to those other meetings and see the dynamic difference between our meetings and those meetings and maybe there would be some understanding.
Okay, other thoughts, other observations? Some more straightforward question and answer that gets to the heart of the matter. Other things that would make things better?
This is Bonnie,
Yeah.
and I just want to let everyone know that Tom's been trying to get in. He's having trouble with his computer.
Okay.
And so he does have some issues that he would like to discuss, but he's not able to get in. So I want you to know he's really trying. And if
Okay.
he can, he will get in.
Okay. Well, and this certainly won't be
Mike?
the only time we
Mike?
have this conversation.
Mike,
Yeah.
I would suggest to Bonnie, would you suggest to Tom that he call in until he can get his computer working?
He doesn't have
Yeah,
he doesn't
yeah,
have a number
we
to
have.
call in.
We
It's
have.
in my email. It's in my email.
Richard.
He can't find it.
Okay. It's on the agenda as well. I can certainly call him, but I don't have his number. Oh, yes, I do. I can give him a call.
Yes, you do.
I do. I'll give him a call.
But Mike, you can't
I have to go find
participate.
it.
All the times you've called him.
Okay. I'll call him. Make sure he's got the number.
So the phone number's not on the agenda, correct?
No, it is.
Where?
It's
It
on the one
is.
I flashed up.
And
I'll get
it's on the appointment I sent this afternoon, and it's on the email that Lisa sent earlier in the week.
He just only got the agenda, I guess. I can't find the number here.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, we'll try to help Tom. Other subjects, or shall we move to the 5-year review addendum?
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah.
This is Margie Sobey. I
Margie.
would just like to say that I think most of what you just went over really was pointed toward CAG members. And there was a section that you scrolled through pretty quickly at the top, and it talked about getting answers to questions.
Mhm.
And I think maybe we need to take a look at that a little more, because we don't get answers to our questions, which is what causes our frustration, like John said. So I think maybe we ought to go back and review that section about having our questions answered.
Okay. And my intention wasn't to focus those behavioral things on anyone, but on everyone. So those behaviors apply to everyone, me included. And I've been told that I have been overstepping and disrespectful. So people have, called it out when I've done it. So it's intended for everyone, including me. But
And that's great. I think we should all be adult enough that we can call others out when it's necessary. But I really would like to go briefly back and look at that answers to your questions section, please.
Okay. So for the typical answerers, do you have your own observations about the degree to which this process is good or not so good at getting questions answered?
I'm just saying we do not get our questions answered.
Yeah, and I'm just looking for the answerers, the typical answerers, to offer any observation they have about why that might be not successful.
I'll try to offer my observation. I think that there are times that we're either not prepared for the question, and so don't have the information available to answer your questions right away. And then I think that there may be times when we aren't clearly understanding the question and we try to answer it, but we're not getting the answer to you that you are thinking answers your question, but we think we're answering your question. So I think it may be, in some cases, a matter of miscommunication, because we aren't understanding the question and you might not be understanding the answer, and we're just sort of missing each other. So that's just my observation.
I'll just take a moment to echo Colleen in that I think what's worked well in the past, when things have worked well, and what I could see working better in the moving forward, is ensuring that when the CAG asks a question, that we fully understand not only what the question is, but what the underlying concerns are that are bringing that question up, because it is a complicated site with a lot of complicated history. So just asking a lot of clarifying questions and drilling down to what the real concern is, I think will make it easier to provide a responsive answer.
Okay.
I have a comment. I have a comment here. Sometimes it's not that we don't get an answer, it's that we disagree. So we'll ask a question. Why aren't the wells closer together, or why are they in spaces and not places they should be, based on what our consultant tells us is concerned? And the answer is, well, because you just don't know, and we're doing what we need to do, and we're not going to drill more wells. So therein lies the separation. We don't get the answer that we'd like to have, but there is an answer, but it's incomplete from our perspective.
Okay, other process improvements we need to just note at the moment before we turn to the next agenda item?
I just want to hop on and say that a lot of questions have been asked and answered, and I don't think, it's often a mistake to make a gross generalization about what has happened. So to grossly generalize and say, sorry, I forgot my camera, to generalize and say that we don't get answers, I think that's not really a fair picture of what happens at these meetings. If we spend 2 hours talking and a lot of questions are answered. So I just wanted to put that out there.
This is Bonnie, Lisa, and I agree with you. I agree with you. A lot of questions have been answered, but are they giving us the answers that we're looking for at the site that can give us technical assurance that what is happening at the site is protective? And when we don't agree with the answer that EPA has given us or the state has given us, when we don't agree with that, the response is usually, well, we answered your questions. We sent a letter. But Lisa, that doesn't mean that the letter that was sent to us is a technically honest answer on what we're looking for in the protection of our health and our neighborhoods. And I feel that it's really, sometimes it's hard for me to sit here and hear, well, we answered you. The administrator sent you a letter. Well, that doesn't mean that we agree. That's why our questions keep coming. And so I understand what you're saying. EPA has spent a lot of time putting words to paper, but we haven't agreed. And that's where we are a thorn in EPA's side, because EPA appears to believe that because they wrote these letters that we're in agreement. Well, we're not. And that's why we keep coming back with questions. And so I think that's where the dig really happens. And you're totally correct. EPA is really good at writing answers back, but that doesn't mean we agree. And that's where the rub comes. So you're correct, Lisa. And I agree with you. EPA spent a lot of time putting words to paper, but we still don't believe or we don't feel that we're in a position where we can say, yeah, EPA gave a good explanation for that. We now understand and we agree with it. Not that we have to agree with EPA. We know that. We know that's not one of the prerequisites, but it would really be nice if we could. But right now we don't. And that's why there's so much back and forth, and people on the CAG think we aren't being answered.
I'd just like to add here that some of the questions that I've asked that still aren't answered are, how far is the plume out? How wide is it? How deep is it? And what's in it? I really haven't heard a clear explanation of that. However, when I was on the call with the Lowry or with the Buckley people, I didn't have to ask that question because they explained it all in layman's terms that were very easy to understand and very clear. And following that, then they talked about what needed to be what needed to be done to alleviate the concern. So anyway, that's an example of what, in my mind, we don't hear.
Okay. Last
So-
thoughts. Karen, I see your hand up. You want to get in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, and I'm on the Buckley CAG as well, and there is a difference in the communication. And just for my colleagues that are in the regulatory agencies, there is a different tone to these letters that we get on other projects. So I would encourage you, if you have a community relations person, is to have them look at some of these letters that are sent out, especially by EPA. I think they're giving answers and they're doing the best they can, but some of the language seems to me incendiary based on the conversations that we have in these groups. So if you just have somebody else take a look at it who's outside the group and say, these folks in the community, as John was saying, they're not happy with the way things are going. Here, read this letter and check your tone on some of this. And I've gotten in trouble. And I know sometimes the CAG members, when they're angry, they have, but I guess I'm expecting more from EPA. I would like to see EPA take a look at the tone of their letters. 3 pages of it gets tiresome. So, and then you can come right back at me if I've written letters or responses that you think are not respectful enough. Then I'll be adult enough to hear that. So thanks.
Okay. So we're up on time. I have Steve's hand, and then so we can just see if there's any last thought after Steve, and then we'll move to the 5-year review. Tom, it looks like you're with us. Everything happening? Okay, good. So Steve.
Thanks. Well, thanks for all those points. I think they're all really good points that people have made here, and they remind me of a conversation that I think we tried to have a number of months ago about getting to John's point about what that looks like, and Bonnie's point about when we disagree, what that looks like, how we address that, how we reduce I think Bonnie used the word concern. We tend to say uncertainty, if we have a lack of information, a data gap or something, we're trying to reduce that uncertainty about whatever the particular issue is. And I do think, I know, Mike started out the meeting talking about process-related things, and I guess I would add this to that type of discussion in terms of, for all the issues, any particular matter that you might want to bring up about the site, we do need to, at some point, at some level, reach an agreement or a consensus on how we will agree to disagree. And we may end up there and we may not. Ideally, there's a whole lot of information about which we would in fact agree. But if we get down to the end and we still have an unresolved issue, we need to figure out a positive, constructive way to take that, call it what it is, and then move on. And perhaps at some point, we circle back to that and, readdress that issue. But, again, our goal and Superfund for all sites, not just Lowry, is to get them from their current condition to a better condition, a protective condition, and what we tend to call as site completion. Now, completion may include monitoring or treatment or things that go on for a long, long time, but nonetheless, we get to a point where we can say the remedy is complete, it's in place, it's functioning, it's working, and therefore it's protective. So again, I completely agree. I think you all have kind of zeroed right in on, some of the things that we need to work on.
Okay, Richard, let me give you the last word, and then we have to move to our next agenda item. So, Richard, last thought, and then we can keep thinking about process as we go. But for the moment, Richard, close us out, and we'll move to the substance.
Okay, well, Steve, you kind of explained what we should be doing and what we have been doing. And what I think I heard you say is EPA comes to a decision that we do not agree with under the terms of what we can do and what we can't do, is after you've made that decision, if we disagree and we have documents or whatever that would prove that we should be disagreeing, we can't do that and we lose our funding. Is that correct?
No, let me try to clarify a little bit. It's, and this is the hard part, and especially trying to do it in advance, because you don't know if you're going to agree or disagree on certain details. So, but with regard to the definition of the plume, for example, defining what adequate monitoring or well placement or depth or that kind of thing, agreeing upon those kinds of concepts and details, and this is where you bring in science, practice of what is typically done, what can be done, what's feasible, and all. And if we had that kind of discussion and we had reached a general agreement on what's possible and what adequate or good enough, I like to use that common term, what's good enough, for this particular situation, then when we get there, hopefully for the most part, we would avoid disagreement. Not 100% may be completely satisfied, but most people would say, yeah, that was a good faith effort. It looks an awful lot like what's done at this other site or this other situation. It employs the best science or that kind of thing. So, that's what I was saying. I'm not saying at all that I expect that you will just go along for going along or getting along. But I'm trying to look at why we're disagreeing, not the fact that we do disagree on something, but why is that? And is there anything that we can do to resolve that?
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, because this shouldn't be a meeting process about process. We should get to substance. And so I want to give Linda the floor, max 15 minutes to give an introduction to the documents you already have on the 5-year review addendum and the fact sheet. And then we'll open it up for discussion after that. So, Linda.
Okay, and I'm going to ask Fran to help me with some of this. So we have 2 events related to 5-year reviews. We had the 5-year review addendum come out in February, and then we have a 5-year review coming up. So our last 5-year review was in 2017. EPA starts 5-year reviews in the year prior. In 2017, we started the 5-year review in May 2016. So we're up right now ready to start another 5-year review. In order for EPA to get the same contractor who wrote the previous 5-year review, SKIO, we entered into a contract with them earlier this month, and we're going to start that endeavor of reviewing everything. So I'm going to ask Fran to give an overview of what a 5-year review is, how that works, and what a deferral is, and then why we did what a 5-year review addendum accomplishes. So Fran, if you want to take over from here, and then I can come back and talk specifically about the 5-year review addendum that just came out.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Linda. So as Linda said in the beginning, I'm the 5-year review coordinator for the EPA office in Denver, and I have a counterpart in EPA headquarters, and together The site teams submit their draft documents to us and we review them to make sure they're complying with guidance and also for national consistency. So the reason we do 5-year reviews goes back to the Superfund law. Congress wrote in the law that we needed to, at least every 5 years for remedies, go back and see if the remedies remain protective. So this is one of the things that I actually really love about the Superfund program. Not everyone does, but for a lot of programs, when a cleanup is done, it's done, and that's it. But the Superfund program has this check built into it where at least every 5 years, as long as we've left waste on site at some level that doesn't allow for unlimited use, then we have to go back. And when we go back in the 5-year review, it's a very structured review that you ask every time. It's not open-ended. We're asking similar things every time. And excuse me, there's 3 specific questions that we ask. Is the remedy function as intended by the decision documents? Are the exposure assumptions, toxicity data, cleanup levels, and remedial action objectives used at the time of the remedy selection still valid? And has any other information come to light that could call into question the protectiveness of the remedy? I know I went through that quickly, but if you need those actual questions provided, we can easily do that. So the whole purpose of the 5-year review is to gather your team, notify the public that we're going to be conducting a 5-year review, so the public and responsible parties can tell us how they think it's going. We conduct community interviews, and we gather information from the last 5 years to answer those 3 questions. And it's a determination that EPA and the state work on together. Ultimately, the document is signed by the division director at EPA after it goes through the regional and headquarters review that I discussed with you. There's even a process where if the region and headquarters disagrees, how we have to elevate it, because you take these really seriously, and they are ultimately, the results are not only tracked in our database about how we're going to resolve issues, but the results are also reported to Congress. So, Linda, did I miss anything you thought I should cover, or anyone? I don't know if it's time to ask questions if anyone has any questions on the process. Mike or Linda, guide me on how you want to
I think you covered everything. And so EPA is the author of the 5-year review, and the state reviews it, but it's EPA's final decision as to what goes in the 5-year review. Is that correct?
It's correct. At some sites, our state counterparts take the lead on writing the 5-year review. Even at those sites, though, the signatory for it is the division director at EPA.
And then I guess if anyone had any questions on the process,
Yeah, we
it's
can divide
probably
do process questions if there are some, and then get back to the substantive.
And could I, Mike, just add one more thing? The reason why is the 5-year review process is EPA collecting the information and making a determination whether we think the remedy is working as we thought when we selected the remedy back at the time we made the decision document signature. So that's how it's set up. We definitely often have in 5-year reviews information we've collected from interviews about what other people think, but ultimately the determination comes down to EPA and how they're considering the information collected, we're considering. So those are the defined processes. I see a hand.
I do too. Go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead. Would you please repeat for me so I can hear you say it, the second item that you of your process? And when you say that, originally my question was, where is the space in what is going forward with regard to protectiveness that takes into consideration changes in technology and
Did you
updates in
mean,
science and so forth, that we're not just at,
sure, did you mean to
yeah,
repeat the
Freya.
second question that we asked in the 5-year review?
Yes.
Certainly,
Yes.
and again, I understand better when I can read and hear. So
Okay.
I'm sure that we can easily send these out for you all. The second question is, are the exposure assumptions, toxicity data, cleanup levels, and remedial action objectives used at the time of the remedy selection still valid? So you asked a good question, if I'm understanding you correctly. What happens in the 5-year review is not that we go back and reopen the 5-year review, reopen the remedies and totally think about things new as if it was today. The purpose of the 5-year review is to go back and look at what was selected and see if it's still protective. Not is there another way to do it now? You'd only start to get to that question if you found out the remedy wasn't protective. In that case, you might have to look at, if it isn't protective, why isn't it protective? And then how does it get fixed? You wouldn't do that in the 5-year review. The 5-year review would make a determination of what was not working well. And then there's a section in the 5-year review called issues and recommendations, where then outside of the 5-year review, which is just a snapshot in time of how the remedy's working, outside of that process, you then work on what do you need to do to go fix it. So did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. I appreciate that very much, because I understand that if it's working, it's like, if it's working, don't fix it. But if it's not working, then it's built into the process to go back and say, okay, we can update
Exactly. Yeah,
a technology or a technique in order
well,
to
I'm
meet the
sorry,
needs.
there's a little delay,
Yeah.
and I didn't mean to step on what you were saying. Exactly, and we often do. We find out. I had a site in North Dakota where we cleaned up and supplied drinking water, and one of the safe drinking water constituents changed. And so we had to go back and look, and actually ran more water lines and supplied more drinking water in that case. It just wasn't protective anymore. And so we have the ability in Superfund to then go take action if that's the case.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your explanation.
Sure.
We got one more hand. Is that Margie?
It is. I would like to know when you will start interviewing the public for the next 5-year review, and if there is an attempt made to contact people who were interviewed at the previous 5-year review.
I will defer to Linda or Lisa.
Yeah, so I can answer that. So we're anticipating that the interviews will be virtual, and it's probably starting in May into June. And I believe some of you have met Treat from SKIO. He did some of the community interviews this last go round. It's highly likely that he will be the one conducting the interviews along with EPA staff. And yes, it would be an effort to interview anyone who is interested in being interviewed for the 5-year review, which includes the people who were in the past. So the invitation will go out to the CAG members. There'll be a notice put in the local newspaper, which will probably be the Centennial, asking the general public if they were interested in getting interviewed. And we'll make a really good effort to, get as much of the community and a good broad picture of the community in their opinions on it.
The last time the public and the CAG members and whatnot were interviewed, there were multiple people in one interview section. And so people could communicate with one another. They could feed off the answers and questions of the other people in the small groups. So since you're going to be doing this virtually, is there going to be an opportunity for that?
Yeah, so there'll be individual interviews and there'll be a group interview, and it could even be several group interviews, you know, so that people have different time slots depending on their schedules. And then there's also the opportunity for people to submit, you know, written responses to questions too. So we're going to make it as easy for people to provide their input as possible. And if there's another way that you think of that you think would be beneficial, we're open to hearing what that would be.
I did hear you say, though, that you liked the group interview. You thought that was a good option?
I did. I thought it was really helpful, especially for some of the people who may not have been very aware of the site. They got to hear what other folks were saying. I just thought those were really helpful.
Thank you. That's good to know.
So I saw a hand go up and down again. Everybody good? So we go back to Linda for the content of this one. Oh yeah, Sonia, go ahead.
Thank you. I have two quick questions. I wanted to ask Fran, firstly, is it ever the case that in the 5-year review, the remedy is considered protective when a leachate plume isn't entirely accounted for and continues? That's question one. And then question two, I think you or perhaps Linda mentioned that different sites have the report prepared by the EPA versus the state public health agency. And I wondered what determines that for, say, for our state. Thank you.
Let me go to the second one first. So usually EPA and the state just discuss workload, and also, you know, sometimes experience for our different staff. You know, it's good to gain experience by writing a 5-year review or assisting in writing one. So we make the determinations for different reasons, but for each one, we decide who's going to be the lead. Sometimes we kind of co-lead them as well. And even when one agency is the lead and the other is the support agency, they usually work, the two project managers and community involvement staff usually work closely together, as well as whatever technical staff is needed to do the review. So it usually just means one's the person either hiring the contractor to assist, or if it's being written internally, being the main person who's in charge of typing. But we try to coordinate on the 5-year reviews as best as possible. Did I answer your second question, Sonia? I think you're on mute. Please chime in if I missed and I didn't answer the second part of the question. The first part sounds like a site-specific question to me. Is that true? Because I'm not up to speed on the site. You're supposed to look at all the situations at the site that were in the remedy or the remedies if there's more than one decision document, and use that information to make a determination if you have the adequate information or not. But since I'm not familiar and I haven't yet read what will be the 5-year review for this site, I don't feel like I am able to give you an answer.
Looks like we lost Sonia.
Okay.
Oh wait, no, she's still there.
Sonia, anything else?
No, perhaps Steve Wharton could respond to my second question about the question about the 5-year review and leachate plumes. Thank you for your response, though, Fran.
Sure, Sonia.
So Steve, anything to add on to Fran's answer for the second question?
Or the first.
Okay. Yeah, well, and please correct me if I'm not responding to the right question or the right portion of it. There are two basic criteria that we're looking at in the 5-year review, and Fran covered those in the questions. They're captured in those specific questions, but basically, fundamentally, we're looking to see if there have been statutory or regulatory changes as one area of concern that we tend to look at. You know, we implement our remedies. We memorialize those requirements in our decision documents, and they are in fact a snapshot in time. They capture what's in effect at that particular moment. Part of the reason for the 5-year review, and Congress was forward-looking in terms of how they constructed it, was that they realized that things could change. New information, new science might come to light, which might be a good reason for us to revisit, to re-examine what we have in place for the remedy, and is that okay? So part of it is just that. It's this more or less desktop examination of what has changed. Are there new laws, new requirements that are out there? The other aspect, the fundamental area that we look at, is the protectiveness question. And in order for us to open that up and dig into it, we have to look at the exposure assumptions. And this gets to your question about if there is offsite migration of, it could be anything. It could be in surface water, it could be in groundwater. There are a number of different ways that contaminants that can move off of a site. But we look not just at the source and the contaminant and where it is, but we look at who might be exposed to that. And we use the term receptor. Typically, we're focused on human health, public health issues, but we can look at ecological receptors as well. So that's the other broad area that we tend to look at. And if we see that we don't have a complete pathway of exposure, then even if the legal requirement may have changed or a toxicity benchmark may have changed, if we can't draw a line and connect the dots, so to speak, between the contaminant in whatever environmental medium it might be then the protectiveness issue, we answer that in a different way. So even if a requirement has changed, become more stringent typically, although not always, but often it becomes more stringent. Unless we can demonstrate that the conditions at the site or off-site, if there's any migration, lead to a complete exposure, then the protectiveness issue becomes moot at that point. In terms of not in terms of looking at it, we certainly still examine that as part of the 5-year review. But if we can't demonstrate that, then the first part does not prevail in terms of looking at the outcome of the 5-year review.
We have a question.
Thank you.
A question in the chat from Tom. Please give us a written copy or reference about the questions asked during a 5-year review.
We can do that.
Yeah, and I've got a note to follow up on that as well. Okay, Linda, back to you.
Okay. So I'm going to ask Fran one more thing. Fran, can you describe, what a deferral is? of protectiveness and how how do we resolve that?
Sure. So we can decide that a part of the remedy is in certain categories after we get done asking those 3 questions, that it's protective, that it's short-term protective, that it will be protective, that it's not protective, or we could decide that protectiveness is deferred. And we do that when, for whatever reason, we don't have enough information. And so we can't make a determination, but then that puts you in a process. It puts EPA and the state in a process where we have to develop our steps to go get that information. And it's actually not a problem as far as the process goes for the project managers to come up with that it's not protective. It's just that we don't like not being able to come up with a determination. So when we end up with a deferred protectiveness situation, the team works towards how do they actually get the information to answer that, even if the answer is that it's not protective. So what that triggers is then we don't only do the 5-year review, you have to do an addendum. And I think that's what Linda's going to talk about. The reason and the only reason why you do an addendum is there was a deferred protectiveness statement in the 5-year review that causes us to write this addendum to once we know enough information to make a determination.
Thank you, Fran.
Sure.
And then I'm gonna,
did I see
I'm gonna try to share my screen if I can. Application window. Okay. I can't see what you guys are seeing. Let me see. Is this an email?
It is.
Okay. So this is the email that Lisa sent out shortly after the last CAG meeting, announcing that the addendum had been signed by our division director. It includes a fact sheet that corresponds to the 5-year review addendum, and then as you can see, like in the document, links to those documents, a link to the 4th 5-year review as a reference. And then I went through and took each issue that was in the 2017 5-year review and then put what projects and documents that were produced to support resolving those issues. And then the purple items in here are in progress. And then each of those links go to those documents. At the last meeting, it was pretty clear that you guys wanted easy access to these documents. They're all up on our EPA webpage for Lowry Landfill. So then I'm going to move on. So if you didn't get that email from Lisa, just email her and she'll send that over to you. Let me see. I'm gonna find my next one. Okay. So is this the 5-year review fact sheet? Can you see that?
Indeed.
Okay. So in the fact sheet, it's just a synopsis of the 5-year review addendum, and I just wanted to focus on the 5-year review addendum found that, so OU1 is now short-term protective, the remaining OUs are protective, and because OU1 is short-term, site-wide can only be short-term protective. So you have that for your reading. And then we have a link to the Lowry Landfill site here for EPA where the documents are. Now, can you see the addendum?
Yes.
Okay. So this addendum is a template by EPA that I have to follow. So it might not be the most logical thing, or you might be like, why is it written this way? It's what we're given by headquarters to fill out. So the beginning of the addendum mentions what the protectiveness statements were in the 2017 5-year review. The next section talks about the issues that caused the deferral of protectiveness. So for operable unit 1, which is shallow groundwater, the issue was private wells were located near the footprint of the plume, and then the recommendation was to sample and analyze those wells, which were the 2 private wells along Jewel, and look at what other wells were there, if they were abandoned. So this discusses how we resolved it, and then what documents those were, and then what the institutional controls are for that. And then the same is for operable unit 6, the vertical migration wells, and we resolved that through these documents. And then because operable unit 3 went from short-term protectiveness to protective, there's a write-up in there on that. And then in this next section, it takes the remaining issues and what we've done so far to resolve those issues, and then what we're currently doing that needs to be completed. So for issue number 1, the north boundary barrier wall containment system evaluation needs to be completed. And so the items in bold are the ones that still need to be completed. Issue number 2 has been completed. 3 is ongoing. That's also needs the north boundary barrier wall containment system evaluation to be completed. And then the other one that still has remaining work is this issue number 7, which is the draft conceptual site model, which is going to go out for public review hopefully soon. And then on this final page section, we have the new protectiveness statements for operable units 1, 3, 6, and site-wide. So these protectiveness statements are 2 parts. So like for operable unit 6, the remedy is protective, and then it says why, because there are no completed exposure pathways, and the plume is, the 1,4-dioxane plume is confined to the shallow units. And then there's the one for that. And then the next 5-year review is due by September 2022. It can be completed sooner. We just can't be late. And then it's signed by Betsy. So that's just like a brief overview of that document. I'm going to stop sharing. Does anyone have any questions on it?
Good. Yeah, let's open this up.
I have a question on the document that you just showed that said the 1,4-dioxane plume is only in the shallow parts. And I don't have the technical terms, but it's my understanding that 1,4-dioxane from the Lowry landfill site is already in the Arapahoe and the Denver aquifers. So how can you make that statement if that's the case?
So I'm going to ask Sarah to address where the 1,4-dioxane plume is. And
Sure.
This is off of the Northern investigation report.
Yes, that's a good reference. And specifically, we're talking about north of the site, north of the north boundary barrier wall, the area that we often refer to as the north end. In that area, we have not detected it below the shallowmost aquifer. That does change as you travel further north because of the geology. So can you see me? I had to turn off my video because my internet keeps flickering.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So at the site, the shallow-most aquifer is the Dawson. Geologically, these sediments are laid down through time, and they're not laid down completely flat, or that's not the way they sit now. They sit at an angle. So as you continue north, that angle transitions to another aquifer, and that's the Denver. And then that becomes the shallow-most aquifer. So those are the two units that we talk about in the north end where we have monitoring wells. Where that transition occurs, it's not a line. What one geologist would call one formation and what one would call the other formation is very subjective. It's not an exact science, but it is all the shallow-most material. Did that answer that question?
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that, but it doesn't make me feel safe.
Yeah, more? Oh, so I got a hand both from Bonnie and from Tom. So Bonnie, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, Sarah, number one, could you please describe where the separation layer is located? Is it near Hamden? Is it near Mississippi? And secondly, did you just say that the next aquifer is not the Denver?
I said that it is the Denver. That would be confusing if I had said not. So thank you for clarifying that. The separation layer is another confusing concept that is also not an exact science, but it is the way I understand it. And Dan and anyone else on the site that has an understanding of this, please chime in. It refers more to water rights and Colorado's water right framework than it does the actual geologic context, the actual geology of the basin here. So the separation layer is this concept of where the Dawson meets the Denver. And as I said before, one geologist looking at the rock in the field might name it in one location, one in another. It has to do with thicker beds of fine grain material, increasing in frequency as you go with depth. And that area though gets delineated so that when Colorado is looking at what water is being pulled from what wells and permitting that, they can say, okay, this well is drawing from the Denver, this one is drawing from the Dawson. I have seen a map that has that surface trace. So as the Dawson meets the ground surface here, and then the Denver does here, the separation layer would occur in between them. It's not a line on the surface. It wiggles and weaves north of the site. So I have seen that map. I think that it might be embedded in some documents. It doesn't have a lot of bearing on risk, what groundwater contamination is doing, where it's going. It doesn't really change our understanding of that. So I don't know. That's sort of a confusing answer, but it's a confusing concept.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. But I want to point out that it does have, in our opinion, a bearing on risk, because so far up until now, the sites that the public can look at, the WSD site, Tri-County Health site, all say that there's no problem because nobody's drinking the water. And so our concern with this idea of where the separation layer is there contamination in the Denver now because of this separation layer is very important, because many of us that live in Thunderbird Estates and living in Gun Club Estates do use the Denver aquifer. And so the separation layer and whether or not the Denver is impacted is very important to us. And it would be a good thing to clearly understand where the separation layer occurred, which we believe from Harding and Loss's study, Golder and Associates, from back in the 80s, we believe it's closer to Hamden, which leads us to believe that that is the area in which the contamination from Lowry can be dipping into the Denver. Now, maybe my well into the Denver at this point in time, or Rudy and Mary Villarreal's well, who are in the Denver, maybe right now the chemicals have not reached our homes, but when we read in the fact sheets and the websites that nobody's drinking the water, it really tends to make us angry because we are drinking the water and future threat is very real to us. So in our opinion, the separation layer is an important part of the overall scheme of things of whether or not we have impacted the Denver aquifer. And so it is important to us. Thank you very much.
I think it might be helpful to speak to that a little bit. Our understanding of, or when we look at where contamination may be going, it's even more conservative than that. So understanding that contamination is in this named unit will never have us assume that it couldn't travel to the next unit just because of where they're mapped to be different. We look at the distribution of the material in those units. So what sort of sediments are there, and whether or not conceptually and based on sort of just the understanding of geology and hydrogeology, it is reasonable or possible to expect that water might be transferring through them. So in all of these types of geologic formations, there's fine grain material and sandy material, and that sandy material is really where transport is occurring predominantly. As I said before, one geologist might look at a section of rock and say, okay, I think that this section is different enough than this section to name it something separate. However, if we're evaluating risk and where contamination might be going, we don't care about that. Unless there's some rock unit that's just ironclad and separating two zones, we're not going to assume that water isn't moving through them according to how they're named. So appreciating that the names do make it easier to talk about depth and general characteristics, we don't make that baseline assumption that it has to be detected in, that if it's detected in, say, the Denver, then now it's sort of wide open in the Denver. Or if it's detected in the Dawson, now the contamination's wide open in the Dawson. That's not how transport really occurs. It occurs in zones within the geology, and where those zones are in relationship to where that line is drawn on the map is not how we would assess whether transport is possible or not.
Okay, I understand that's your conclusion. I appreciate it, but as we move forward, it doesn't make me feel any better about the fact that contamination is moving into the Denver aquifer. And I don't know when or how it may happen. I don't want it to be our private wells that are impacted. And it would be very comforting if the agencies would quit alluding to the fact that no one is drinking the water. If you want to say, here's Murphy Creek, it's all on City of Aurora water, no one there is drinking the water. However, the Denver does surround their homes in the area. So if there's contamination in the water, it impacts them, but they aren't drinking the water. But don't allude to the fact that none of us are drinking Denver aquifer water, because we are. And we don't want to wait until it's there. So I appreciate your concept, but I'm very concerned about it, considering that we have 138 million gallons still sitting there at the site, and we're not sure what's happening at the base of that mass. very concerning to those of us that use well water.
So Bonnie, is that statement in this addendum, no one's drinking it?
I'm sorry, I can't understand you, Michael.
So the statement that no one is drinking it, is that in this 5-year addendum?
I don't think so. I don't know. It's alluded to and it's still up on the websites. When you go to the websites, it's still up there.
But
So
not in this document.
I haven't had a chance to read it all. This was a lot of documents to go through. I've gone through most of them. I have not seen that yet. I've looked for it in the fact sheet, but we're still alluding to the fact that right now, Dr. Berry's risk assessment and EPA are saying there's no risk to those drinking the water. And that does not make those of us using well water feel that that's the truth. We don't know what the truth is. And we don't appreciate that being said, because as we found out when we gave our presentation at the study session for the city of Aurora, those people have been convinced that there's nobody drinking that water and the Denver aquifer is not contaminated. That is what they have found from all of the information that's been released from the agency so far. And it's not true. And so we need to have that clarified so that those of us that have this concern aren't looked at as though we're just hyperventilating and we're really being unreasonable, because we're not.
And Bonnie, the fact sheet says the risk assessment concluded there were no unacceptable risks to human health or the environment from 1,4-dioxane in surface or groundwater. That's what the fact sheet says.
Correct. But we know there's more than 1,4-dioxane in this water. We know that it's not above standards. We know you don't have to do anymore to test what's in the water and to understand our concern. 1,4-dioxane is not the only concern in our water. And we know that's for a fact, and we know that there are other things there below standards, so you don't have to check for them. And please tell me, when you've tested the 2 wells you keep touting over on Jewel, what was tested for in those wells?
I'll answer that, and then I'd like to sort of appeal to the greater conversation. So we have tested for a full suite of volatile organic compounds, semi-volatiles, site COCs, and water quality parameters in those wells. But I do think a number of pretty major topics are being brought up and not necessarily being explored in a way that would bring the whole group along for the topic. So it does sort of bring up the next agenda item, though, which is the conceptual site model, which is a tool to provide sort of a space to have all that information in one spot. And I'm wondering if it might be worthwhile to know, some of the concerns brought up, put them on an agenda for a future CAG meeting, and transition to that next agenda item.
So Tom and I have something to say.
Yeah, let's move to Richard and Tom, and then we do want to leave time for the CSM.
Yeah, Michael, how about Tom first?
Sure, Tom and then Richard.
And can I remind everyone to mute, because someone does have some background noise.
Okay, Tom.
Hi. I guess I'm going to need some help here, because I'm looking at the 5-year review, and it calls for compliance with EPA's 2008 guidance, a systemic approach to the evaluation of the capture zones in the pump and treat system. And it was 2 areas, OU1 and in I think it's the groundwater monitoring plan. And my concerns is that those things haven't been, or this hasn't been done in a comprehensive way. And I guess another way of saying it is I think there were some things that were left out. And as a result, the conclusions of being protective are not based on the entire picture, because the entire picture hasn't been looked at completely. So let me try to give them. I'm sorry that there's so many of them, but I think that they're important. There's supposed to be a capture zone in 3 dimensions, which is defined. And that capture zone should be for each chemical constituent. And for instance, 1,4-dioxane will be one of them, but also for something that has come up and it was outside of the site, which is the molybdenum. Then once you've got a capture zone, you've got that delineated in 3 dimensions, then you go out a little bit further than the capture zone and you define a target capture zone, and you measure in all of those areas and you make sure that everything in the target capture zone is captured to make sure that in the future nothing escapes from the capture zone that you're not seeing. And so that's one of those 2 capture zones have never been defined. The cone of they're using some assumptions that that don't fit with the guidance. One is the cone of depression caused by extraction wells seems to be confused and equated to a capture zone associated with that extraction. And I know that's it's technical, but basically the problem is that they're using the cone of depression as actually a capture zone, but the capture zone is a region that contributes to groundwater extraction by the extraction well, and the capture zone is function of the drawdown and of the background without remedial pumping of hydraulic gradient. I don't see that being done or explained in a way that I can understand it is being done.
So Tom, are you in one of the supporting documents? I'm just trying to follow.
The 2008 guidelines.
Okay.
And then once all of this has been done, then you go ahead and decide, where should you be putting your extraction wells and your sentinel wells. And if that hasn't been done, then maybe there's some extraction wells and sentinel wells are not in the right place. Another area that is being used to make the decisions, it makes it, and I'll give this all to you in writing because I know it's too much. But these EPA is using a groundwater flow model for developing a horizontal and vertical dispersion ratio of groundwater. And there was originally from 1972 to 2013, they decided that the groundwater flow was 2.67 feet horizontally for every 1 foot vertically. And then since then, there's a second dispersion ratio that implied in the EPA's claim that 1,4-dioxane has traveled 3 miles north of the site, but only descended vertically for 80 feet. And that's the 1,4-dioxane plume. That would mean the dispersion rate's 198 to 1. So how can one be 2.6 to 7 to 1 and another be 198 to 1? Again, this is math, but you're not explaining why those things are different, and yet you're coming up to a final conclusion. And then the numerical conceptual model used in the third rate uses a third ratio of 20 to 1 instead of 2.67 to 1. So that you've got three different ratios that have been put out there, and yet you're not explaining how these three ratios are you being used together and figure out what's right, and you're coming to conclusions that you're protective.
So Tom, I've got four things. I just want to give EPA a chance to answer any or all. The capture zone in 3 dimensions, the cone of depression, the well locations, and these dispersion ratios. So,
yeah, I wanted to interject. So I don't know how to raise my hand, so I'm sorry. Else I would.
This will do.
I looked, but so I want to like back up to something Tom said in the beginning. So, and since we have Fran here, this is a great opportunity for her to talk about how do we resolve 5-year review issues, because what might be written as a recommendation in a 5-year review, under the process, we have several options to resolve those. And, one is that we follow exactly what it says. The other is that, we decide it's not appropriate and we don't do it. But Fran knows the exact one. So I'm going to kind of put her on the spot and ask her the options to resolve 5-year reviews issues relating to recommendations. And then after that, I'll turn it over to Sarah to answer some of those capture zone questions.
And I've got my issue will fit an answer from Sarah.
Yeah, Richard, I'm coming to you after some of these get.
Yeah, but wait, let me talk before Sarah, then she can talk to what I'm going to say while she's doing the rest.
Well, I was going to have Fran answer
go
them.
ahead with Fran, but I want to jump in before Sarah.
Got it.
And so Linda's correct when it comes to the process. All the issues get put into our database and they get tracked nationally. And it could very well be, remember I said, and I think Steve Wharton also said, that the 5-year review is a snapshot in time. So you find an issue, you don't try to resolve it in the 5-year review. You note what the issue is and you say what the path forward is going to be. It could very well be in many cases as we start to look at something that we realize either there's another issue or we realize that it isn't quite what we thought when we were taking that snapshot, or we're able to resolve it. And so there's a place in the database where we track, so you're not locked into doing exactly what you thought at that point in time. You can use that information and you can actually explain that it was resolved, or that you considered it and dismissed it, but then you have to write the reason why it was dismissed, or you have this new information that caused you to do something else. So Linda, I think that's what you're getting for, and I'm sorry, I don't have
and then there's
memorized.
And if there's a better way to resolve it, then that's also an option too. And that's the option that we took with the capture zone analysis. We didn't feel was robust enough. So we took a more robust methodology, and Sarah can explain, what that is, especially at the north boundary barrier wall. Like, what is the approach that we're taking there? So Sarah, are you available?
Yeah, but Sarah, before you go, let's get Richard's on the table.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Then you can just roll.
Okay.
So, Richard, what was the other topic?
To go along with what Tom had to say and what Bonnie's had to say and others have to say about the Denver. I got my foot stuck in the middle of the Superfund site at B504. And if you read about B504, you'll say, well, gee, they drilled it down and they found pollution, but all of a sudden the WSD conveniently said, oh, it was double drilled, it was this, it was that. So we're going to go over, we're going to drill another one. Where'd they go? They went over to an uncontaminated area and drilled another well to the same depth. And oh, it was clean. Oh, well, I'll just say one thing. I was in the oil business. I lost a well that was doing real well. I had a split casing. I had to abandon that well. But do you think I went a half a mile away and drilled another one? Hell no. I drilled 10 feet away and hit a big one, the same one. You just don't do that. And it's never been explained. It's just, oh, that's what we did. But to me, the Denver aquifer pollution is a real issue. And y'all got to know that from what I understand, that the groundwater flows to the north. Well, who lives to the north? Tom, me, Mary, we all live to the north. And does it go down a little bit as it goes? I think everybody would agree it does. So could it ever get there? I'm done.
Okay, Sarah, so you have a list. Let me just give you the floor, and then we'll see where we are and whether we keep doing this or talk about CSM. So Sarah, go ahead.
So I guess I'll start with, actually, I'll start with B504. I think that maybe that should just be punted to an agenda for another CAG meeting. I don't have the history on that, but seems like a good topic to sort of dive into. And then as far as the capture zone analysis, that 2008 guidance, that's something we've discussed at a number of different CAG meetings, and I'm hearing that there's still outstanding concern. So just for the benefit of the larger group, Linda did a pretty good job of explaining that guidance is pretty elementary. It's pretty basic. It's mostly looking at designing, most of it is looking at designing a pump and treat system for a much, I would say a much simpler Superfund site, where you're looking at building an extraction network and making sure it's reaching all the parts of the subsurface that you're trying to pull from. So the reference to that guidance wasn't necessarily a mistake in the 5-year review, but it wasn't going to do the job for the issue that was raised. Lowry landfill includes barrier features that stop water and contamination from flowing, extraction wells, drains, and incorporating how all of those work together with the hydrogeologic units and the contamination on site. That was a big question. That's why the numerical model was developed, because we do have an extraordinary amount of information for this site, and we could build a far more robust tool. The fact that there have been so many wells drilled means we have a lot of information from those drilling logs about what the material looks like as they drilled down. To me, that's the most important information for, I won't say the most, but it's extremely important and extremely valuable to be able to take all of that information over an area and then connect those dots. So we have fine grain material here, but here we have a sand, and it continues over here and over here. That sand transports groundwater according to these rates. And being able to build that framework in 3 dimensions, that's like a Cadillac of a model versus the capture zone guidance, which is pretty much a bicycle. Diving in, I think that it would be beneficial to at some point dive into a bunch of assumptions have been made that go into that model, and trying to back out Tom's questions into the overarching concern. It sounds like the overarching concern is, why are those assumptions appropriate, and why are you confident that they are enabling you to determine whether or not contamination might be, where contamination is moving, specifically if it is not moving downward. Being able to dive into that, I think, is not something I can do a very satisfying job just with words off the cuff in the next couple minutes here. So, but I think that's a great topic for a meeting potentially. It is highly technical. We had a half dozen technical experts on that subcommittee, including EPA consultants, not just the ones, you know, that you have heard most from, like Jody, if you guys remember him from the past, or Diane, but CDM Smiths as well, and ERTs, and drawn from different offices. And then we have we had our own modeler who we contracted in through Don Bussey. Why am I blanking on his name? And now he works for Region 2. Help me out, Linda.
Dave Edgerton. Dave Edgerton.
Dave Edgerton, who he is a very high level numerical modeling expert. So he dove into the assumptions and the setup for the model very deeply. And being able to sort of fast forward or condense why all of those things were determined to be appropriate might be a little bit beyond the end of this meeting. But I think it's definitely a great concept to explore, a question to explore.
Okay, we're right up against our end time. Do you want to continue on this, save the conceptual site model stuff? Linda, do you want to shift and very quickly just give that overview before people have to go at 6:30? And for others, what's your pleasure?
I think that's me anyway.
Yeah.
I think it's me anyway. It's pretty brief.
Like, there are questions in the chat window.
Okay.
John Seaman is asking, has a cumulative risk assessment been completed, and has a groundwater tracer study been completed?
So I'm not sure what cumulative means, so I'm going to defer it to David Berry.
Yeah, I would like to know what the term cumulative means so that I can better address your question. What we have addressed in the North Boundary Plume risk assessment was just the wells that are, the monitoring wells that are in the North Boundary Plume, and that's what we addressed. I don't know what you mean by a cumulative risk assessment. Can that be clarified?
Yeah, Joan, if you...
Hi there. Bonnie was saying there was more than just 1,4-dioxane, and that it's being said that, well, if nobody drinks the groundwater. And so that's why I was wondering, first, has the groundwater ever had several of the EPA approved groundwater tracers, so you can see how far it goes, where it's traveling, et cetera. But also, if there are more than just 1,4-dioxane and people are drinking it, a cumulative, and that's why I wondered, are we talking a health risk assessment that was completed for the site? And if it was a health risk assessment, has EPA performed a cumulative? And a cumulative means you add it up. You add up the chemicals that could potentially be an issue, and perform a risk assessment.
We addressed in the North Boundary Plume, we addressed all of the chemicals that were detected in that North Boundary Plume from I forget what the name of the street is, but from the northernmost portion of the site. And there was one well just on to the north side of the site that had some VOCs detected in that groundwater. Those were included in the risk assessment that we performed for the north boundary plume.
And Joan, I just put it in the chat, a link to that risk assessment.
Right, and I guess that was just my question, and we've determined that this particular site has never had a cumulative risk assessment where the potential for more than just one chemical being identified. And I think tonight I just heard there are multiple chemicals in a particular well. And
Right.
so
So
I was wondering, yes, do they ever has there ever been a cumulative risk assessment?
The risk assessment has it in there. It has the other chemicals mentioned in there.
And adding them together is what's called cumulative. You add it together and you determine what the risk is for the chemicals that you're looking at, not just one chemical per chemical, but adding them together. So you've already let me know that is not anything that has been completed here to give the community an idea. When you do a cumulative risk assessment, you add them up.
Right, but the concentrations are so low that that would not be an issue.
It might be, depending on the chemical.
I think it's important to note, and I didn't correct this before, but when we think of the geology and the subsurface, it's like thinking of the ground surface and then like where 10,000 feet where a plane is flying. And 1,4-dioxane north of the site is the chemical that's associated with the site in the groundwater contamination. And that would be like at the ground surface. There is a whole lot of geology, hundreds to, I guess I'll get specific, about 650 feet to over 1,000 feet of rock between that detection, which is between that detection and the zones that the water wells are pulling from. So in review of the information we have, which is robust, it is not a conclusion that people are drinking water impacted. So I'll say it the other way. It is a conclusion that people are not drinking water impacted by Lowry Landfill Superfund site.
There it is, Bonnie.
Okay.
And then the tracer study question, I think not what you are imagining. There has been sort of a proxy of a tracer study conducted at one point for the site around the north end. It had to do with changes in water quality. But I think that that's sort of tangential to what your actual concern was.
I'd like to ask Joan a clarification question, and that is when she's talking cumulative, is she talking about a single chemical multiple times, or is she talking about different chemicals and their reactions to one another? Is that what she's talking about as cumulative?
Hi, I was having trouble getting back to the CAG. That was a very good comment. That is exactly what I was saying. First of all, is when you pull the chemicals together, is the community aware that there is such a thing as a cumulative health risk assessment to determine not just for cancer, et cetera, but for just physical impacts, et cetera. So, but yes, adding those chemicals together, and it is definitely being considered in it and has happened. As far as the tracer study, I'm just interested in, and I see that it's happening at the Lincoln Park Superfund site where that has been requested to have a blue dye tracer to determine where is this dye going. This isn't anything that's toxic, but that would let some people know how far it is and where it would travel.
So this is Bonnie, and I want to thank you, Joan, for bringing that up. Like I said, the last meeting, which I brought up, cumulative effects, and I'm surprised that Dr. Berry doesn't know what that is. But I am saying that there are more effects to human health from being exposed to chemicals in your water than cancer, We're looking at many health effects that can register looking very innocent, but they are really devastating impacts after a while. There's heart effects, and there's, I think that when we're talking about cumulative effects, everybody that we asked that about at the last meeting seemed surprised and didn't really have good information about it. Now this time I hear David Berry saying, explain that to me. So that's a good answer right there for you, Joan, that it's not being looked at. And we believe it's very serious, and the kind of chemicals that we have at Lowry Landfill Superfund site, we don't know if it may be breaching on the bottom, and if it is, how deep that is and what waterway it may follow to get out of there. It may not be out yet, but we would like to know what's happening with the mass at the site of 138 million gallons of chemicals. So we think this cumulative effect is a very important issue.
So,
Bonnie, has a
I know that-
tracer ever been done? I'm still confused.
No.
Nobody answered it. Nobody has considered a tracer study at the
No.
Lowry landfill?
No.
Okay, so
Never.
I'm gonna jump in. I know you all could keep going, and we are at the time. So there is clearly a long list of agenda items that spring from this conversation. We also have the conceptual site model to get to. So Lisa, Bonnie, Tom, Janine, and I will gather and sort out what documents will be released, whether the conceptual site model will or won't, and what else is happening. The topics that you all raised tonight, and we will begin to construct an agenda for April. I'm going to let you all go here in a second, but just want to see, Linda, if there's any last words.
Yeah, there is. I wanted David Berry to be able to, it looks like he wanted to say something.
You bet. Yep, you've got to defend that.
Yeah, people have different terminologies. So it's important for us to ask clarifying questions so we completely understand what your question is. So synergistic effects, might be the same as cumulative, but, as we talked earlier in this meeting about the ground rules, and part of that, we mentioned asking clarifying questions so we completely understand what you're asking. I just think that was a fair question on our part. So, but David, I don't know if you have anything you want to say.
Well, I would like to say to Bonnie that if you read the risk assessment that we conducted for the North Boundary Plume, we estimated risks for cancer and for non-cancer endpoints.
Mm-hmm.
And we addressed all of the chemicals that were detected in the North Boundary Plume that were at the detection limits. And some people may think that a cumulative risk assessment might be a risk assessment that deals with all of the chemicals that are out at the Lowry landfill. And that could be a cumulative risk assessment. That kind of a assessment was done many, many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What we addressed was just the chemicals that were in the North Boundary Plume, which included some VOCs and 1,4-dioxane.
Okay, I understand that. I understand that because I read your risk assessment and we did comment on it, and I don't think it was a risk assessment that I can rely on for my safety, for my well. I don't want to step on anybody else's toes, but before we hang up here, Michael,
Yep.
I asked a question in an email to EPA today. And I see that Chris Wardell was on the line tonight. Could we please know, does the public have to get a FOIA to look at public documents from EPA?
Yes.
We sent you a response to that. Did you not get my email?
So Lisa, do you want to just?
Other people on this committee are interested in the answer.
So Lisa, you just want to recap, and then we'll let you all go about the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks.
The bottom line was that when we are releasing documents to the general public, and that is documents that are not already publicly available as part of the administrative record, supporting an EPA decision document or published on the EPA site file, we need to follow the FOIA process so that we can track the documents that are being released and how they are being released.
Okay, so
because,
now
because that document was not the comments the CAG made and EPA's responses to the CAG, that document was not on this in the site file yet.
Okay, it's been done for a long time. And I'm just wondering, so the public now has to go through this FOIA process to get documents that have been in existence for a long time? Is that the bottom line?
Well, if they're in existence, Bonnie, like if they're on our website and what have you, those are publicly available documents.
Is this
now,
on
if people are looking for documents that maybe haven't been publicly released, like, reinstate what Lisa said, they go through FOIA online. That's a common practice, and it's not an overly burdensome process. And that also makes these documents available for anyone else who wants to see them, whereas potentially not using the FOIA process cuts off certain routes of overall public transparency.
Chris, may I make one statement? These are Superfund sites. These are national Superfund sites. There's an administrative record that is required to be posted by EPA. Several of the CAGs, have absolutely had no problem, and they're CAGs without names, but they're CAGs that were a teaching tool for other CAGs to take a look at what kinds of things that they'd be asking. And I've already received 3 CAGs input without names, just 3 CAGs. And if you wouldn't mind, would you be able to provide any documentation before I call around the country to different, I'll make that call to regions to find out that we have right now a citizens involvement plan for 20 years ago for the Vasquez Boulevard site. It's called a draft that was posted. It never went to final. It was a draft final, but it never went to final. So that's what I'm saying. You're saying you want other people to be able to see it. Would you provide something that says that in the community involvement plan, documentation for the public, that they should know to learn how to file a freedom of information, and then find out if a lot of it gets redacted with the names? I understand that, but I'm just saying that learning from other CAGs is really a great opportunity, and that's pretty open. And as I said, the other CAGs absolutely willingly say, this is our comments, etc. So I've never seen this, Chris, and if there is something that you could put in writing or point to where EPA National absolutely says that the community should understand how to file FOIAs and how many people will be filing that FOIA. The EPA's FOIA process in trying to read or access documents is absolutely a tragedy. But what I want to say is that at this point, if there is somewhere that says that the citizens advisory groups should not have anything posted on their recommendations regarding a national Superfund site, and they have to go file a freedom of information, that'd be great.
Just to clarify too, some of these documents might have been released by other entities, by EPA, and how those are released that by EPA or not by EPA, that's on whatever entity releasing them. But like we stated before, EPA has a very defined FOIA process for documents that haven't already been released publicly.
Well, is it Colorado Department of Health that's helping the communities?
I'm going to jump in. Y'all are both neither on the agenda nor in the amount of time for this meeting. So I think you and Chris should continue the conversation. I'm going to say that Bonnie, last words on this CAG, and or Linda, any last words? And then we're going to let you all go on your way.
I just want to say thanks to everyone. I think we had a really productive conversation, and we value the CAG's input, and we've taken notes, and we'll be getting you some things that you requested.
I have a list of mine, and we'll also start working on the April agenda with the agenda group that I mentioned earlier.
And I just have one last thing. It was on the agenda that we could ask CDPHE what their role is now and if they agree with this fact sheet. And we didn't get to that. So can we move it to the next CAG meeting? We'd like to talk with them and we'd like to hear their side of this. And we'd like a little bit of clarification on where they stand on water contamination and some of our questions tonight. Just a general discussion and question on their position and have they been actively involved in this recent release of documents. I'd like to have a time to have that discussion at the next meeting.
So Colleen, not much of a chance for you or Dustin to get in a word edgewise tonight. These 2 hours go fast. So we can talk about how to do that coming up.
Thank you.
Good? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you all. We will
Thank
see
you.
you in a month and a week because we're going to push out.
Okay.
As you saw earlier. So we'll be in touch about the date and all the rest.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Stay
Everyone.
safe.
Thanks.
Good night.